The flickering firelight danced across the rough, anxious faces of the four cavemen, casting long, jittery shadows that seemed to writhe with their growing unease. Grok, the eldest, a man whose every wrinkle told a tale of survival, grunted contentedly as the warmth chased away the evening chill. He had seen many sunsets, many dangers, and the fire was always their steadfast companion. Beside him, Chato, ever nervous, fidgeted with the hem of his animal hide tunic, his eyes darting to every sound beyond the comforting circle of light. He was the youngest, and the world outside the cave always seemed to hold 1,000 unseen threats. Borak, usually the most stoic and dependable hunter, stared intently into the dancing flames, lost in a rare moment of quiet contemplation. Even his strong frame seemed to carry a subtle tension tonight. And then there was Thunk. Thunk, never the brightest of the bunch, but possessed of an instinctual, almost animalistic awareness. Suddenly, a guttural cry ripped from his throat, startling the others. He leaped to his feet, his burly arm raising their prized possession, a crudely fashioned stone hammer, its heft the only defense they had against the creatures of the night, or so they believed. But it wasn't a growl from the darkness that had startled Thunk. It was a faint, unsettling rumble, a sound that began deep within the earth and vibrated through the very rock beneath their feet. High above, dislodged by some unseen, monumental force, a massive boulder had broken free from the cave ceiling. At first, it was just dust and small pebbles, raining down like a sinister prophecy, a warning whisper that quickly escalated into a deafening roar as the huge rock began its terrifying plummet towards them. The air grew thick with pulverized stone, stinging their eyes and filling their lungs with grit. Chato yelped, a high-pitched sound of pure terror, instinctively covering his head with his trembling hands. His small body curled into a ball, seeking refuge from the inevitable. Borak's eyes widened in terror, his usual composure shattered, replaced by a primal fear that distorted his features. He instinctively reached for his own crude spear, but it felt useless against such an overwhelming force. Grok, his weathered face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror, could only stare upwards, his mouth agape, the comfortable crackle of the fire now a mocking counterpoint to the impending doom. He had faced mammoths and saber-tooths, but this was a force of nature, indifferent and unstoppable. Thunk, in his panic, had raised the heavy hammer not as a weapon, but as a desperate, futile gesture of defiance against the mountain itself. His mouth was agape in a silent scream, a primal sound of pure, unadulterated fear that seemed to echo the very roar of the falling stone. The fire, their source of comfort and protection, now seemed a fragile beacon against the crushing weight about to descend. Its warmth, once so reassuring, now felt insignificant against the chill of impending destruction. Their world, their small, fire-lit haven, was about to be shattered in an instant, leaving them at the mercy of the unforgiving earth. The air crackled with the energy of the falling rock, and for a terrifying moment, time seemed to slow, each second stretching into an eternity as the shadow of the boulder loomed larger and larger, threatening to engulf them all. Part 4. Ignoring the tremor in her legs, Eliza scrambled towards the bed where Clara lay sleeping. "Clara, wake up. We have to go," she cried, shaking her sister gently but urgently. Clara stirred, her brow furrowing in confusion as she blinked open her sleepy eyes. "Eliza? What is it? What's happening?" Before Eliza could explain, the man recovered, his eyes blazing with fury. He lunged towards them, his long, claw-like fingers outstretched. Eliza pushed Clara behind her, placing herself as a shield between her sister and the looming threat. "Run, Clara! Run and don't look back!" Eliza yelled, shoving her sister towards the bedroom door. Clara, though still groggy with sleep, sensed the urgency in her sister's voice and the sheer terror in her eyes. Without question, she scrambled out of bed and fled towards the door. The man roared again, a sound of pure rage, and turned his attention back to Eliza. She stood her ground, the brass candlestick clutched tightly in her hands, her small frame trembling but resolute. She knew she couldn't defeat him, but she could buy Clara time. Every second she could delay him was a second closer to Clara's escape. The fight was desperate and uneven. The man was stronger, faster, his movements fueled by an unnatural power. Eliza dodged and weaved, swinging the candlestick whenever she had an opening, landing a few glancing blows that only seemed to enrage him further. He swatted at her like a fly, and she stumbled back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the room. The man staggered back, clutching his head. Eliza saw her chance. She lunged forward, grabbing the heavy porcelain water pitcher from the washstand. With all her remaining strength, she smashed it against the side of his head. The man roared, a guttural sound that was part pain, part fury. He stumbled, his tall frame momentarily unsteady. Eliza didn't hesitate. She turned and fled towards the open bedroom door, following the path Clara had taken. Part 5. They ran through the dark corridors of the old house, Eliza's heart pounding in sync with the frantic rhythm of their footsteps. The man's enraged shouts echoed behind them, growing fainter as they put distance between them. They burst out of the back door and into the cool embrace of the night. The moon was a sliver in the inky sky, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around them as they fled across the overgrown garden and towards the safety of the woods beyond. Eliza glanced back once, catching a glimpse of the man's silhouette in the doorway, a dark and menacing figure against the faint light spilling from the house. They didn't stop running until they reached the dense cover of the trees, their lungs burning, their bodies aching. They collapsed onto the damp earth, gasping for breath, the silence of the forest a welcome reprieve from the terror of the house. Eliza held Clara close, her arms wrapped tightly around her sister's trembling form. They were safe for now, but she knew that the debt, whatever it was, and the creature who had come to collect it, would likely not be so easily deterred. As the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky, casting a pale light through the trees, Eliza knew their lives had changed forever. They would have to be vigilant, always looking over their shoulders, forever haunted by the memory of the man in the top hat and the chilling promise of a debt yet to be fully paid. Their escape was just the beginning of their ordeal. Absolutely. Here is the story in several parts. Part 1. The old house groaned under the weight of the night, each creak and sigh amplified in the suffocating silence of the bedroom. Eliza stood frozen, a statue carved from terror, the heavy hand on her shoulder a tangible anchor to her nightmare. The man in the towering top hat exuded an aura of malevolent amusement, his smile a jagged, unsettling line in the dim candlelight. His gaze, cold and predatory, held her captive. Across the small room, nestled amidst the worn pillows and faded quilt of their shared bed, lay Clara. Her breathing was soft and rhythmic, her youthful face serene in sleep, oblivious to the darkness that had seeped into their sanctuary. Eliza's heart ached with a fierce, protective love, a love that momentarily overshadowed her paralyzing fear. This creature, this harbinger of dread, would not touch her sister. Over her dead body, what unholy business brings you to our door? Eliza finally managed, her voice a strained whisper that trembled despite the steel in her spine. She had to appear strong, for Clara's sake, even as her own knees threatened to buckle beneath her. The man's chuckle was a dry, rasping sound, like autumn leaves skittering across cobblestones. Business, my dear? Oh yes, indeed. The most crucial kind. A debt must be collected. His grip tightened infinitesimally, a subtle reminder of his superior strength. Debt. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Eliza's mind flashed back to her father's final days. The fever had racked his body, but amidst the delirium, he had spoken of a promise made long ago, a bargain struck in desperation, a debt that would one day be called in. At the time, she and her mother had dismissed it as the fanciful ramblings of a dying man. Now, staring into the soulless depths of this stranger's eyes, Eliza knew the truth. The past had come to claim its due. Their family had never been wealthy, but they had always been honest, their lives built on hard work and simple decency. What debt could they possibly owe that would summon such a terrifying figure in the dead of night? The unsettling tales that had circulated in their small village, whispers of strange disappearances, hushed rumors of a collector of souls, suddenly took on a horrifying reality. They were no longer just stories told to frighten children. Part 2. Eliza's gaze darted around the dimly lit room, desperately seeking an escape, a weapon, anything to break free from the suffocating grip of her terror. A heavy porcelain water pitcher sat on the washstand, its floral pattern barely visible in the gloom. By the hearth, the long, cold iron poker leaned against the soot-stained bricks. She was small, frail even, compared to the hulking figure behind her, but the thought of Clara lying defenseless filled her with a surge of adrenaline. "I know of no debt," Eliza declared, her voice gaining a newfound steadiness. "Whatever delusions bring you here, you are mistaken. We owe nothing." The man's smile widened, revealing a row of teeth that seemed unnaturally long and sharp in the flickering candlelight. "Oh, but you do, my dear. Your father made a pact, a promise for prosperity, for good fortune. And now," he paused, his breath cold against Eliza's ear, "the price must be paid." Prosperity? Good fortune? Their lives had been a constant struggle since she could remember. Her father had toiled tirelessly in the fields. Her mother had mended clothes and taken in laundry, and yet they had barely scraped by. If this was the price of some long-forgotten prosperity, it was a cruel and bitter jest. "If my father made such a pact, it was without our knowledge or consent," Eliza retorted, her chin lifting in defiance. "We are not bound by his foolish bargains." "Ah, but the terms were clear," the man hissed, his voice losing some of its earlier amusement, replaced by a sharp edge of impatience. "The debt passes through the bloodline, and tonight," his gaze flicked towards the sleeping Clara, "it is time for the first installment." Eliza's blood ran cold. She understood then. He wasn't just after possessions. He was after life itself. He intended to take Clara. Part 3. A primal scream welled up in Eliza's throat, but she choked it back, knowing that it would only alert Clara to the danger without offering any real defense. Instead, she acted on instinct. With a sudden, desperate surge of strength, she twisted away from the man's grasp, her shoulders scraping against his coat. "Get away from her!" Eliza cried, lunging toward the nightstand. Her hand fumbled for the heavy brass candlestick, her fingers closing around its cold, solid weight. She turned back to face her tormentor, her heart pounding in her ears, the flickering flame casting wild shadows across her determined face. The man seemed genuinely surprised by her sudden defiance. His smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "Foolish girl," he sneered, his earlier veneer of civility cracking. "You cannot hope to stand against me. I will not let you take her." Eliza spat, raising the candlestick like a weapon. Her hands trembled, but her gaze remained steady, fixed on the menacing figure before her. "I will fight you with everything I have." He took a step towards her, and Eliza swung the candlestick with all her might. The heavy brass connected with a sickening thud against his arm. The man roared in pain and surprise, momentarily recoiling. This was her chance. The luminous secret of Echo's End. The West was a canvas of harsh beauty, but nowhere was it more pronounced than in the desolate reaches surrounding Echo's End. This was no ordinary ghost town. It was a silent sentinel under the gaze of two relentless suns, each burning with an intensity that promised not just heat, but revelation. Legends whispered of a treasure hidden deep within its abandoned mines. Not gold, but something far more profound, something that pulsed with an ancient, forgotten power. Among the few who dared to venture near was Anya Kale, a woman whose elegance seemed utterly out of place in this rugged land. With auburn hair that shone like polished copper and eyes that held the wisdom of forgotten libraries, Anya was an archaeologist, not a gunfighter. She wasn't seeking gold. She was on a desperate quest for the luminous scroll, a mythical artifact said to contain the lost knowledge of a vanished civilization, a truth her own family had secretly guarded for generations before it was stolen. The West was merely her crucible, testing her resolve. But Anya wasn't alone in her pursuit. The very air vibrated with the name of Bud Gayson Uriurine, the most ruthless outlaw the territories had ever known. His wanted poster, plastered on every decaying post, depicted a man whose eyes were not just cold, but seemed to emit a faint, unholy glow, especially terrifying under the dual glare of the suns. Bud Gayson was obsessed with the luminous scroll, believing it would grant him not just power, but a terrifying vindication of his own madness. He saw the glow in his eyes not as a curse, but as a destined mark. Anya found an unlikely ally in Silas, a grizzled, taciturn man with a meticulously cared-for revolver and a saddle that looked like it had seen 100 deserts. Silas was a tracker of renown, but there was a deeper history to him. He was a former guardian of the very knowledge Anya sought, bound by an ancient oath to protect it. He watched Anya with a quiet intensity, his stoicism hiding a fierce, protective loyalty. Their journey to Echo's End was fraught with peril. They first encountered Jed, an old prospector, his face a roadmap of despair, shielding his eyes from the sun not just from glare, but from a vision of betrayal that haunted him. Jed knew fragments of the scroll's legend, whispered by the wind, but terror had silenced him for years. Bud Gayson's gang had captured and tortured him, forcing him to reveal what he knew. Further along, they stumbled upon Cole, a young prospector, his face a mask of pure terror. He had accidentally unearthed a crucial clue, a strange, star-shaped stone, and had been relentlessly hunted by Bud Gayson's men ever since. Anya, with her knowledge of ancient symbols, immediately recognized its significance. And then there was Rance, a formidable figure, his face contorted in anger. He was a distant descendant of the original Guardians, like Silas, but had been consumed by a burning rage after his family was wiped out by a previous attempt to steal the scroll. He wanted not to protect the knowledge, but to destroy it, believing its existence only brought suffering. The deeper they delved into Echo's End, the more the pieces of the puzzle aligned. The luminous scroll was not a map to gold, nor a spell for power. It contained the blueprints for a sustainable, self-sufficient society ***, harnessing the desert's energy, transforming its harshness into harmony. It was the legacy of a people who had understood the balance of nature and sought to create a utopia, a truly beautiful knowledge. Bud Gayson, however, interpreted the power within it as a tool for domination, to control the suns themselves. Anya faced constant moral dilemmas. Should she risk everything to retrieve a knowledge that might be too dangerous for the world? Should she seek revenge against Bud Gayson, or simply protect the scroll? Silas, always observing, subtly guided her towards the path of guardianship, reminding her of her ancestor's sacrifice. The final confrontation took place in the heart of Echo's End, deep within the crumbling ruins of what was once a grand observatory, now exposed to the blinding glare of the two suns. The air crackled with a strange energy. Bud Gayson was already there, his glowing eyes fixed on a pedestal where the scroll was meant to reside. He believed the combined light of the two suns at this specific hour would activate its full power. He stood surrounded by his last remaining men, their faces grim but resolute. "It's mine," Bud Gayson roared, his voice echoing through the ruins, his eyes blazing brighter than ever. "The power to command this land, to remake it in my image." Anya stepped forward, followed by Silas, Jed, who had found a flicker of courage, Cole, clutching his starstone, and Rance, his anger battling his sense of duty. The fight was not merely with bullets. It was a clash of ideals. Thorne's strategic mind from a past life guided their movements. Clint, the stoic protector, positioned himself for the crucial shot. The climax was sensational, as Bud Gayson lunged for the empty pedestal. Believing the scroll would materialize, Anya revealed it, not as a physical parchment, but as a complex, almost living light pattern reflected through the starstone Cole had found. It was a projection of intricate diagrams and equations, not words, designed to be understood by the enlightened. Bud Gayson's glowing eyes were not a mark of power, but a side effect of a rare mineral poisoning, enhancing his vision but also driving him mad with delusions of grandeur. Enraged, Bud Gayson fired at Anya, but Silas, quick as a desert snake, blocked the shot. Rance, momentarily letting go of his anger, helped secure Cole. Jed, remembering his betrayal, used his knowledge of the ruins to collapse a section, isolating Bud Gayson. The final showdown was between Bud Gayson and Silas, a silent duel of wills and bullets. Silas, with a heavy heart, fired the fatal shot. Bud Gayson fell, his glowing eyes fading to a dull, lifeless stare, consumed by the very madness he embraced. Anya knelt, picking up the fallen starstone. The luminous scroll wasn't a magic spell. It was a blueprint for a harmonious existence, a testament to humanity's potential for ingenuity and peace. She looked at Silas, then at the desolate land bathed in the glow of the two suns. The story concluded not with a grand explosion, but with a quiet, profound triumph. Anya, instead of hoarding the knowledge, chose to share it. She and Silas began to teach the remaining townsfolk, using the scroll's wisdom to find water, cultivate desert-resistant crops, and harness solar energy. The former ghost town of Echoes Inn slowly began to bloom, a beacon of hope born from ancient wisdom and selfless courage. The harsh desert remained, but now, under the gaze of the two suns, there was not just heat, but the warmth of shared purpose, a truly beautiful legacy rising from the dust. The sun beat down on Whisperwind Gulch with a vengeance, two blazing orbs in the sky seemingly conspiring to bake the very life out of the earth. It was a place where hope had dried up faster than a desert creek, a forgotten speck on the vast canvas of the American West. Marshall Thorne, a man whose glory days were long behind him, had sought refuge here, hoping the perpetual dust and silence would bury the ghosts of his past. He often stood, shielding his eyes from the relentless glare, trying to blot out not just the sun, but the memories that seared deeper than any desert heat. Thorne carried the weight of a monumental failure, a town he couldn't save, a family he couldn't protect. His uniform was long shed, replaced by the nondescript clothes of a prospector, but the lawman's burden clung to him like burrs. He just wanted to disappear, to let the wind whisper away his name. But the West rarely granted peace to the weary. The threat loomed large, plastered on every peeling wall, a wanted poster bearing the image of Bud Gayson near your eye. His eyes, a chillingly accurate depiction of the rumors, seemed to glow with an unnatural, malevolent light, promising destruction. Bud Gayson wasn't just a bandit. He was a force of nature, ruthlessly expanding his dominion, choking off remote settlements like Whisperwind Gulch by cutting off supply lines and terrorizing the few prospectors who still dared to chip away at the barren hills. The townsfolk, a haggard lot, lived in a constant state of dread, their faces etched with a mix of fear and simmering anger. Old man Silas, whose eyes always darted nervously, had seen Bud Gayson's cruelty up close. Young Jeb, whose face was a mask of raw fury, had lost his meager claim to Bud's expanding empire. One sweltering afternoon, a new shadow fell over Whisperwind Gulch. A quiet, stoic figure rode in, his face obscured by the brim of his hat, a thick, coppery beard catching the sunlight. He dismounted, a well-worn saddle slung over his shoulder, a gleaming revolver holstered low on his hip. This was Clint. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man on a mission, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing. He rented a small, run-down cabin and kept to himself, though his presence, calm and formidable, was noted by all. Among the few pillars left in Whisperwind Gulch was Eleanor Vance. Sharp, intelligent, and fiercely determined, Eleanor ran the town's general mercantile, trying to keep her family's legacy afloat despite Bud Gayson's stranglehold. She watched Thorne with a wary eye, She'd seen enough lawmen abandon their posts to trust easily. Yet, desperation gnawed at her. Supplies were dwindling, and fear was turning into despair. Thorn initially wanted no part of it. He'd seen the wanted poster, heard the terrified whispers. He'd even seen the frantic face of a young prospector, screaming in terror after encountering Bud Gayson's men. He just shook his head, retreating deeper into his self-imposed exile, shielding his face not from the sun, but from the appeals in their eyes. The tipping point came with the chilling news that Bud Gayson's gang had systematically burned every family farm in a nearby valley, kidnapping the children and demanding impossible ransoms. This was not mere banditry. It was an act of pure, unadulterated evil. It snapped something in Thorn. He looked at the haunted faces around him, the despair in Eleanor's eyes, the sheer terror in Silas's, the raw anger in Jeb's. He couldn't hide anymore. That evening, in the dusty saloon, Thorn stood up. His voice, rusty from disuse, carried surprising authority. "We can't just wait to die," he declared, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "Bud Gayson won't stop until there's nothing left." Clint, who had been silently nursing a drink, set his glass down. "He knows this land better than any man alive," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And I know him." A stunned silence fell. Clint looked up, his eyes meeting Thorn's. "I rode with him once, before his eyes started burning like that, before he lost whatever soul he had." Clint revealed that he had been hunting Bud Gayson for months, seeking to atone for his past association. The saddle he carried wasn't just equipment. It was a symbol of his solitary, relentless journey. A plan began to form. Thorn, with his old lawman's tactical mind, Clint, with his intimate knowledge of Bud Gayson's methods and hideouts, and Eleanor, with her precise understanding of the local landscape and dwindling resources, started to forge a desperate strategy. They would use the very harshness of the desert against Bud Gayson, luring him into a carefully chosen ambush point, a narrow pass where the relentless sun beat down, creating mirages and sapping strength. The showdown was set. As the sun reached its zenith, two blinding discs in the bleached sky, Bud Gayson and his riders galloped into the trap. Bud Gayson, a monstrous figure, his red beard ablaze in the sunlight, his legendary eyes indeed seeming to glow with an eerie, internal fire, laughed as he saw the small, defiant group waiting. "Looks like some lambs came to the slaughter," he bellowed, drawing his shining revolver. But Thorn was no lamb. His gun, old but true, barked first, clipping one of Bud Gayson's men. Clint, moving like a phantom, appeared on a ridge, his own revolver spitting fire. He knew Bud Gayson's tics, his favorite moves, and anticipated them. Eleanor, from a hidden position, signaled to a group of townsfolk they had armed, who then released a strategically placed rock slide, creating chaos and confusion among the gang. The battle raged under the twin suns. Dust, gunpowder, and the desperate cries of men filled the air. Thorn moved with the renewed purpose of a man given a second chance, his years of experience guiding his aim. Clint, driven by a deeply personal vendetta, engaged Bud Gayson in a brutal, up-close fight, their revolvers flashing. Bud Gayson's eyes burned with a maniacal rage, but Clint, knowing the man's every weakness, fought with a cold, precise fury. Finally, with a gut-wrenching shot, Clint hit Bud Gayson squarely. The infamous outlaw staggered, his glowing eyes dimming, and he fell, a legend collapsing into the dust from which he rose. A weary silence descended. The fight was over. Whisperwind Gulch was free. Thorn, though bruised and exhausted, felt a lightness he hadn't known in years. He looked at the grateful faces of Eleanor, Silas, and Jeb. He hadn't fully buried his past, but he had finally found a measure of redemption. Clint, his mission fulfilled, simply nodded to Thorn and Eleanor. He took his saddle, swung it over his shoulder, and walked towards the horizon, a solitary figure disappearing into the fading light, another phantom of the West moving on. Whisperwind Gulch, scarred but victorious, began the long, hard journey of healing. a testament to the day they faced their fears under the blazing twin suns and won. Beyond the dusty horizon, where thorny bushes and rugged rock formations stretched endlessly, lay Sundown City. Its name, though seemingly mystical, belied a harsh and unforgiving reality, much like nature itself. Life for the residents of this town revolved around the sound of gunfire and the thud of horse hooves. Among them were several notable individuals whose destinies intertwined on one peculiar evening. First, there was Old Jack, with his cowboy hat, a furrowed brow, and an old rifle in hand. Jack was both the protector and the enigma of Sundown City. It was rumored that many years ago, he had been a notorious outlaw, but after some unknown incident, he changed his ways and began living as the town's guardian. Yet, his past always remained shrouded in mystery. Next was Callie, the owner of the town's only saloon. With her reddish hair, sharp gaze, and sweet smile, Callie was the heart and soul of Sundown City. Even in dire situations, she never lost her courage and always tried to bring smiles to people's faces. However, beneath her smile lay a deep sorrow that she never let anyone see. One day, a stranger arrived in Sundown City, Eagle Eye Dan. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, and his hand with a gun was lightning fast. It was clear from Dan's demeanor that he had come with a specific purpose. He seemed somewhat worried while checking his horse's saddle outside the town, as if he had lost something valuable. That very day, wanted posters appeared on the outskirts of the town, featuring a notorious bandit named Bud Gayson Urine. Many townsfolk flinched at the sight of his burning eyes on the poster. It was said that wherever Bud Gayson went, he brought destruction. Countless murders and robberies were linked to his name. Just a few days later, Bud Gayson Urine's gang truly attacked Sundown City. They were far superior in number and armed with advanced firearms. Although initially terrified, the townspeople, led by Old Jack, stood their ground. Callie closed her saloon doors, comforting those who sought shelter inside, while Eagle Eye Dan moved around the town's nooks and crannies, keeping an eye on the bandits' movements. The gunfight began. The air grew heavy with dust and the smell of gunpowder. Jack, with his old rifle, accurately picked off bandits one by one. Callie, from her saloon window, took opportune shots. But the bandits were too numerous, and slowly, they began to take control of the town. Just then, Eagle Eye Dan appeared as a savior. He swiftly leaped from one rooftop to another, raining bullets down on the bandits. With his impeccable aim, one bandit after another fell to the ground. Inspired by Dan's courage and skill, the townspeople found new resolve. But the fight was not yet over. Bud Gayson Urine, with that terrifying gaze seen on the poster, had been hiding, waiting to witness the town's downfall. When he saw that his gang was almost defeated, he stepped forward himself. In his hand was a gleaming revolver, and in his eyes, the fire of ferocity. Bud Gayson aimed his gun directly at Callie and fired. Callie closed her eyes in fear, but the bullet did not hit her. In a split second, Eagle Eye Dan rushed forward, pushing Callie out of the way, and took Bud Gayson's bullet himself. Before Dan fell to the ground, he drew his own revolver and shot Bud Gayson in the chest. Bud Gayson let out a horrific scream and collapsed, the fiery gaze in his eyes slowly extinguishing. Eagle Eye Dan was also severely wounded. Callie rushed to him and began to cry, holding him. Dan managed a weak smile and said, "I think I found what I was looking for." Then his breath faded. The people of Sundown City celebrated their victory, but a deep sorrow filled their hearts. They realized that Eagle Eye Dan had sacrificed his life to save their town. What he had been looking for while checking his horse's saddle was perhaps the hope for a new life, which he had found among the people of Sundown City. Old Jack silently. Once upon a time, in the dusty, sun-scorched lands of the Wild West, there was a notorious outlaw named Bud Gayson Urine. His name echoed through the canyons and saloons, a whisper of fear and a legend in the making. Bud wasn't just any bandit. Rumors claimed his eyes glowed with an unholy fire, a mark of a pact made with shadows in the deepest caverns. The wanted posters plastered across every town bore a stark image of a man with a wild, untamed beard and eyes that indeed seemed to pierce through the paper itself. Our story begins in the small, beleaguered town of Redemption Gulch. The townsfolk lived under a perpetual cloud of anxiety, ever wary of Bud Gayson's next raid. Their once vibrant community was now subdued, their laughter stifled by the looming threat. Among them lived a young woman named Clara, fiercely independent and possessing a spirit as fiery as the desert sun. Clara ran the town's only general store after her father's passing. She was the heart of Redemption Gulch, her resilience a beacon of hope in their troubled times. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly, a group of dusty travelers stumbled into Redemption Gulch. They were a motley crew. Jedediah, a grizzled old prospector with tales etched on his weathered face. Silas, a quiet and observant man with a knack for tinkering with machines, and a charismatic but shifty-eyed gambler known only as the Serpent. They claimed to be passing through, but there was a palpable tension in their demeanor, a hidden agenda that Clara couldn't quite decipher. As the travelers settled in the town's meager saloon, a commotion erupted outside. A lone rider galloped into town, his face pale with terror. "Bud Gayson," he gasped, pointing back the way he came. "He's coming this way. They say he's got a whole gang with him this time." Panic seized Redemption Gulch. The townsfolk scrambled to barricade their homes and businesses, their fear turning into a desperate resolve to protect what little they had. Clara, though frightened, felt a surge of defiance. She wouldn't let Bud Gayson terrorize her town any longer. Meanwhile, the travelers in the saloon exchanged knowing glances. Jedediah clutched a worn leather-bound map. Silas nervously adjusted something hidden beneath his coat, and the Serpent's eyes gleamed with anticipation. It was clear they knew more than they were letting on about Bud Gayson's impending arrival. As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the ominous sound of approaching horses echoed through the stillness. Bud Gayson Yearurine and his gang descended upon Redemption Gulch like a pack of wolves. They were a rough and menacing bunch, armed to the teeth and with a hunger for plunder in their eyes. Bud, a towering figure with a thick, fiery red beard and those unsettling eyes, surveyed the town with a cruel smirk. Well, he drawled, his voice a low rumble. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little lamb waiting to be fleeced." The gang charged into the town, their gunfire shattering the fragile peace. The townsfolk, though outnumbered, fought back with surprising courage, defending their homes and families. Clara, armed with her father's old shotgun, stood firm behind the counter of her store, taking aim at any outlaw who dared to approach. Amidst the chaos, the travelers revealed their true intentions. Jedediah unfurled his map, revealing a hidden passage leading out of Redemption Gulch. Silas unveiled a cleverly disguised Gatling gun, which he expertly positioned to provide cover fire. And the Serpent, surprisingly agile, darted through the streets, sowing confusion among the outlaws. It turned out that these travelers were not mere wanderers. They were bounty hunters, each with their own reasons for wanting to bring down Bud Gayson Yearurine. Jedediah had lost his claim to Bud's treachery. Silas's family had been victimized by the outlaws' gang, and the Serpent, despite his shady demeanor, had a personal vendetta against Bud. A fierce gunfight ensued. Bullets whizzed through the air, and the dusty streets became a battleground. Clara, inspired by the bravery of the bounty hunters and the resilience of her fellow townsfolk, fought with unwavering determination. She even managed to take a shot at Bud Gayson himself, grazing his arm and earning a furious glare from the outlaw leader. The fight raged on until dawn broke, casting long shadows across the ravaged town. One by one, Bud Gayson's gang members fell, their reign of terror finally coming to an end in the dusty streets of Redemption Gulch. Cornered and wounded, Bud Gayson faced the combined might of the bounty hunters and the townsfolk. In a final, desperate move, Bud lunged at Clara, his eyes burning with an unholy light. But before he could reach her, Silas's Gatling gun roared to life, riddling the outlaw with a volley of bullets. Bud Gason Urine, the terror of the Wild West, fell silent in the dust. A collective sigh of relief swept through Redemption Gulch. The nightmare was finally over. The townsfolk emerged from their barricaded homes, their faces etched with exhaustion, but their eyes shining with newfound hope. Clara, standing amidst the debris, looked at the bounty hunters with gratitude. "You saved us," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Jedediah smiled, his weathered face crinkling at the corners. "We had our own reasons, Miss Clara, but it was your town's spirit that truly turned the tide." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over Redemption Gulch, the townsfolk began the arduous task of rebuilding. The scars of the battle would remain, but so would the memory of their courage and resilience. And Clara, the heart of Redemption Gulch, knew that their town, though shaken, was finally on the path to healing and a brighter future, free from the shadow of Bud Gason Urine. The legend of the glowing-eyed outlaw would forever be a part of their history, a reminder of the day Redemption Gulch truly earned its name.